Everyone laughed when my sister mocked my budget flight to Dad's birthday brunch. I am Dana, a 25-year-old private equity specialist from Portland, and I was quietly staring at my pristine linen napkin when the giggling started. My older sister Claire pointed directly at my slightly wrinkled cotton jacket. "Did you honestly fly comfort class just to save a few pennies, Dana?" she asked loudly. Dad smiled without looking up from his menu. I kept turning my heavy silver thumb ring while my hands grew entirely cold. My brother-in-law, Richard, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "I'm just happy you could afford to join us," he joked. My mother, Sandra, smiled awkwardly, adjusting her pearl necklace. The waiter pretended not to hear the tension. I forced myself to smile and reached for my water glass. Nobody noticed that I wasn't embarrassed. I had spent months planning Dad's birthday, hoping this year would feel different. Instead, I sat quietly while everyone enjoyed the joke. I had no idea the laughter around that table was about to disappear completely. Dad had always admired appearances, and my family loved expensive things, making sure everyone else noticed their visible status. Richard ran a regional delivery company and never stopped talking about his rapid expansion plans at our family gatherings. "A person should enjoy life while they can," Dad always said, nodding toward their expensive designer shopping bags. Mom adjusted her pearl necklace and nodded politely. "Your father just wants everyone to appreciate nice things," she whispered. I smiled and listened quietly. For years, Claire and I had competed for attention without ever saying it out loud. She believed success should be visible. I believed success should feel peaceful. Richard laughed and lifted his coffee cup. "Maybe next year we'll buy Dana a business class ticket," he joked. Everyone laughed again. I looked out the window toward the rainy Portland streets and took a slow breath. They expected me to defend myself. Instead, I just smiled. Some truths don't need loud arguments, they only need time. And sometimes the people laughing the loudest have no idea how close they are to being completely humbled by reality. The private dining room smelled like lemon pastries and old mahogany furniture, keeping the atmosphere heavy and formal. I excused myself and walked toward the reception desk. Our family ally, Arthur, who was the restaurant's older head waiter, smiled warmly when he saw me. "Happy birthday to your father," he whispered. I smiled back and asked him to bring out dessert a little later. "Of course, Miss Dana," he said. As I walked back toward the table, I stopped for a second and looked through the rain-covered windows. Dad was laughing at something Richard said. Claire was scrolling through pictures on her phone. Mom looked tired. For a moment, I wondered if I should forget everything and simply enjoy the meal. Then I remembered why I had spent 6 months preparing Dad's present. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to thank the man who taught me to work hard, even if he didn't always understand me. I smiled softly and sat back down. What happened next changed every single relationship in our family forever, turning their jokes into absolute silence. I walked back to the table just as the waiter placed Dad's pancakes and eggs in front of him. Richard was still laughing, looking at Claire. "Maybe next year we can all chip in and upgrade Dana to first class," he joked. Claire nearly spilled her mimosa laughing. Dad smiled and lifted his coffee cup. "Nothing wrong with saving money, sweetheart, just don't forget that life is meant to be enjoyed," he added. I smiled politely and reached into my purse. "Actually, Dad, I brought your birthday present." I slid a cream-colored envelope across the table. Dad opened it slowly. Mom covered her mouth. Claire stopped smiling instantly. Inside was the deed to a small lake house in Oregon, the same place Dad had admired every summer for years. Dad looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Dana, what is this?" he whispered, his voice shaking. I smiled softly. "Happy birthday, Dad." For the first time all morning, nobody at the table had anything funny left to say. Nobody touched their food. They just stared at the papers in stunned silence. Nobody touched their food after that. Dad kept reading the papers with trembling hands. Mom wiped tears from her eyes. Claire looked completely stunned. "You bought him a house?" she asked quietly. I nodded. 6 months ago, I wanted it to be a surprise." Richard stared down at his coffee. "Then why fly economy?" he asked. I smiled. "Because comfort lasts a few hours. Memories last longer." Dad looked down at the lake house pictures and shook his head. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. I squeezed his hand. "You're my father, that's enough." Another customer at the restaurant had recorded Claire's jokes and Dad laughing. By evening, the clip appeared online. Nobody expected much, but 48 hours later, the video had reached 11 million views globally. People weren't talking about the house. They were talking about how quickly people judge someone they think they understand. The messages kept arriving long after we left the restaurant. Mom called me that night, crying so hard she could barely speak. "Your father hasn't slept," she whispered. I sat quietly beside my window while rain tapped softly against the glass. "Mom, I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone," I said. She sniffled. "That's the worst part. You weren't trying to prove anything." Dad refused to answer my calls for 2 days, not because he was angry, he was ashamed. The same man who laughed at my economy seat now spent hours staring at photographs of the lake house. Claire stopped posting pictures online. Richard suddenly became quiet. Their perfect image didn't look so perfect anymore. By the third evening, Mom called again. "Your father keeps saying he doesn't know how to face you," she whispered. I closed my eyes. For the first time in my life, I heard sadness in her voice instead of excuses. I wasn't prepared for that, and honestly, neither was Dad. 3 days later, Dad called me himself. His voice sounded older somehow. "Dana, I failed you," he said quietly. I closed my laptop and listened. I spent years admiring appearances. I forgot who my daughter really was. Mom cried softly beside him. "Claire was wrong," she whispered softly. "We were wrong." I stared out the window without speaking. Finally, I answered, "Dad, you laughed too." Silence filled the line. I heard him take a long breath. "I know," he whispered. "And I'll regret that laugh for the rest of my life." I felt my chest tighten. For 25 years I had wanted approval. Now I heard guilt instead of pride. I wasn't hurt because of the joke, I told him quietly. I was hurt because nobody defended me. He started crying. It was the first time I had ever heard my father cry, and somehow hearing it hurt more than the joke itself. The room went dead silent as his pride finally dissolved into raw regret over the phone line. 2 weeks later, Claire knocked on my apartment door alone. She wasn't wearing makeup. She looked exhausted. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I invited her inside. She sat down and started crying almost immediately. "Richard and I are drowning in debt," she admitted openly. "We've been pretending everything was perfect because we were embarrassed." I handed her a tissue and listened. "When Dad opened that envelope, I realized how shallow I've become," she whispered. "I made fun of you because I thought appearances mattered." I looked at my sister and remembered all the years we spent competing for attention. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly. She lowered her head. "Because I was ashamed." We sat there in silence. Revenge hadn't changed her. Shame had. Sometimes people don't change because they're punished. Sometimes they change because they finally see themselves clearly. And sometimes that hurts more than consequences. 2 months later, we spent our first weekend at Dad's lake house together. Nobody talked about the video. Nobody mentioned the brunch. Dad spent the afternoon teaching Mom how to fish while Claire made breakfast and Richard quietly washed dishes. Everything felt awkward, and honestly, awkward was better than angry. That evening we sat on the porch watching the sunset over the water. Dad looked at me and smiled. "You bought me a house," he whispered, "but what you really gave me was another chance." Mom wiped tears from her eyes. Claire squeezed my hand. I looked across the lake and felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Healing wasn't dramatic, it was slow, it was uncomfortable, but sitting there beside the people who once laughed at me, I realized something important. I had stopped trying to earn their love. I already had it right here at this wooden table. Everything after that was simply grace. Some wounds heal quietly when people finally choose love over pride. Last weekend, we celebrated Dad's birthday again beside the lake. Nobody mentioned economy seats or first class. Nobody cared anymore. Dad grilled hamburgers while Mom laughed at his terrible jokes. Claire brought homemade pie and Richard helped clean the dishes without anyone asking. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. Watching everyone laugh together, I realized how much had changed in a single year. Some families teach you what love looks like. Others teach you what pride looks like. Both lessons matter. If this story stayed with you, if you saw something true in it, please like this video, subscribe so you never miss one, and leave a comment telling me. Did I make the right choice, yes or no? Everyone laughed when my sister mocked my budget flight to Dad's birthday brunch. 48 hours later, 11 million people watched our family learn that character matters more than appearances. And somewhere along the way, I stopped needing anyone's approval. That's the story. As the sun disappeared behind the lake and everyone continued laughing around the picnic table, I quietly smiled to myself. Some memories fade with time. Others remind you that kindness always matters more than appearances.